There's an unexpected turn in the weather this morning, says our local meteorologist. Instead of seeing a warm day, we're getting a snowstorm that sources are saying could turn into the storm of the century. Dad turned off the radio, being extremely grumpy for it being this early in the morning. It's always a storm of the century with these guys, he muttered, tapping his fingers on the old worn steering wheel. His wedding ring clicked against the aged leather. I looked away from it before I could start thinking about Mom. We got along fine, Dad and me. Even with Mom gone, drives like this, going to school before anyone else got there, was my favorite. It was a quiet time we shared before the cancer finally took her, and even though at home we felt her absence like a dang cavern swallowing us whole, here, in this old pickup truck, things were fine. We were okay. He had to work over at the factory. Always did, so I always got dropped off to school hours before anyone else got there. Teachers got used to seeing me there by myself, doing homework, reading a book, or since my parents scrounged up enough money to get my cell phone, playing games that don't eat up any of my precious data. Today was no different. The parking lots were empty when we pulled up to the school. I appreciated my silence. It was a good time to think. Call me pretentious, but I don't think enough people spend time thinking on their own. Enough time to process. When I opened the truck door, it was biting awful cold, cutting straight through the jacket I had on. Dad took off his scarf and tossed it over to me. I was too old now, too close to being a man for him to wrap me up the way he used to. I looked up to the dark sky, clouds rolling in like tidal waves, and saw a fleck of snow beginning to fall. Dad grunted and started the truck up again, sputtering to life, the only thing in the empty parking lot. Looks like it'll be a rough day, son. Try to stay warm. It was 2:37 p.m. It was the 6th period English class when we got the announcement. Flickering over the intercom, Miss Millis stopped her lecture on the Lord of the Flies to listen. Due to the amount of snowfall, we are going to stay on campus until the snowplows can reach the side of town. Your parents have been informed that you will be with us until you can safely be picked up. The process of being checked out by your parent will be gone over by the 6th period teacher, where you will stay until we are able to safely release you. Yes! Bray and Donovan practically shouted in my ear. I had a chem test after school? Guess there's a God after all. Settle down, Mr. Donovan, Miss Millais warned. Even though she was looking at him sitting behind me, I flushed under her gaze. When she saw me turn red, she smiled slightly. I didn't know why I bothered looking away. My giant crush was obvious, and was probably flattering to her. Miss Millais was probably in her mid-30s, real pretty, and unmarried for some reason. Everyone said she was a lesbian. She sighed, turned off the projector. Well, I can't imagine getting any work done with you all knowing we have a snow day. Go ahead and stop hiding your cell phones from under your desks or behind books. We all know you have them. You can use them until we figure out what's going on. Everyone laughed and cheered up, putting away their books and binders. Some people didn't even play on their phones, just talking about how great it was to finally get some time off to relax. There was half an hour left in class, and she was basically just letting us go. It was awesome. I got dragged into some conversation that I paid no attention to, instead glancing around the room and thinking about my classmates. Arlette, the cheer captain, who was beautiful and pleasant and smart, the kind of unfair sort of graces that God gives out sometimes. Then the most unfair of all of his doings, Delilah, who was an emancipated sort of thing, with hair that stayed short and greasy even after a good washing, doodling away in her sketchbook, usually from some anime, sharpied fingernails scratching at the pinned stars of the back of her hands. Herman, who was in the marching band and would never shut up about it, Nick, who was also in the band and deeply ashamed of it, Chuck, redheaded and obsessed with her books and stories, and there were some people's names who I still don't know and can't remember, so unremarkable to the world. Brian was probably my best friend. He was popular, and I guess I was too, by association. Brian ran track, and I watched. He dated cheerleaders, and I hung out in front of the gas stations with them, sipping on a Slurpee while they made out. He was a pal, and the most annoying human being on the planet. He smacked me in the back of the head as if he had read my mind, offended. You paying attention at all, Davy? Nope, I said, shoving him off me. A group of girls around us started laughing. It was 4:13 p.m. The lights above us flickered out, stopping all conversations in the room. It had been an hour or so at the end of the school day. The outside world was wrapped up in darkness and snow, the light gone, and even though the sunset wasn't due for another few hours, everyone was unnerved by the sudden quiet. Delilah looked up from her sketches for a moment, and then looked back down, apparently undisturbed by the quiet disruption. Spooky, Miss Millais deadpanned, rolling her eyes. A few people chuckled, easing some of the tension. What, you pussycats afraid because of a few flickering lights? She smiled. I always liked her, even when I was a kid. Before my brother graduated, she was his teacher. She was always so nice to me. She called me cute when I was 7. I guess that's all it really took. We're not supposed to be here this late, you know, Chuck said in a hushed voice. Everyone turned to look at her. No one's supposed to be here after hours. Why not? Brian asked, obnoxious as ever. Because of the witch, idiot, she snapped. The one who lives in our school. Brian paused for a second. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Language, Mr. Donovan. He's right, though, Arlette interjected. What do you mean that a witch lives in our school? That's insane. Chuck shook her head. No, really, it's true. I read about it in the library once, about the history of the school. It used to be an unholy place that the witches worshipped and practiced dark magic. They used to perform sacrifices right here where the school is today. Well, I suppose if you really want to tell scary stories to pass the time, I'm fine with that, Miss Malaya said, checking her watch. I'm going to see what's going on with the other teachers. The phones aren't working, probably because it's after hours. I'll let you guys know what's happening in a bit. She left the classroom, leaving the door slightly ajar in case something happens. Everyone automatically moved their chairs into a circle to listen to Chuck. She was a weirdo, but always told the best stories. With our phones running low on power from playing them for the past few hours, it was the closest thing to entertainment that we could get. The only person who didn't scoot over was Delilah, still drawing away. It was creepy. She was creepy. The lights flickered overhead again, and Arlette drew closer to me. Brian waggled his eyebrows at me, and I threw an eraser at his head. Chuck cleared her throat. I found it at the very back of the library when I was a freshman, tucked away on the shelf like nobody wanted me to find it. It was about the history of the school and the land it was on before it was built. It was old and falling apart. Like if I sneezed, the whole thing would fall apart into dust. I was really careful when I started reading it. Turns out, there was a colony here back in the 1700s. It was quiet and good and all God-fearing people. They prayed every day that the winter would be kind and that the snow would not come. But it came every year, wiping out crops, killing livestock, and oftentimes taking the lives of the colonists. Still they prayed, and after years of things happening, the town's elders started to wonder, why was this happening, even after they prayed to their God? Because they touched themselves at night, Brian snickered. Arlette gave him a dirty look and he stopped. They realized that it was because of a witch. She lived in the town, a young lady that they suddenly realized had always been there, even as generations passed. Nobody realized, maybe because they cast a spell on them. Boo! Cast a spell, my ass. Shut up, Brian! That she never aged and stayed exactly the same. Year after year, it turns out that it was her the whole time, and the sacrifices that the snow brought was keeping her youthful after all this time. When the town elders discovered this, they vowed to get their revenge. The lights dimmed, then glowed brightly again. Arlette grabbed my arm, squeezing it tightly. They found her in the cottage all alone, facing the corner with her head up, chanting her spells and in a choked scream. The snow had already begun falling when the elders grabbed her and dragged her into the town center. She was still chanting, eyes rolled up into the back of her head. The town sheriff ordered a fire be built so that they can burn the witch, but they couldn't get it kindled with the snow falling so thickly. He tried to tie her hands together, but it was so cold that his fingers would not cooperate. So instead, he took the blacksmith's hammer and nailed her hands to the hanging post. There was no blood. There was never any blood. Witches don't bleed. He ripped out her tongue so that she would stop the snowfall, save his town, but she continued to scream. He slit her throat, and whatever breath was left in her body exhaled the last of her spell. And the town was blanketed in a white, lost until it thawed that spring. New settlers found the entire town, melted out and gone, rotted in the sun. But they never found the witch. The nails were there in the hanging post, but she was gone. I didn't realize I was digging my nails into my palm until the pain came slow, like a realization. I let go and shook my hands, deep indents in my skin. Arlette did not let go of me, though. So the new settlers built Arlena Falls here, and Arlena Falls High School. Every year, we get major snowfalls as the witch tries to find her next sacrifice. Kids keep disappearing or getting into fatal accidents as the years went by, which is why we're not allowed to stay here late at night. Nuh-uh, Herman protested. The marching band stays here late every day, and you don't see us being sacrificed. And the band nerds are prime candidates for virgin sacrifices, Brian yelled. I socked him in the arm. He was my best friend and definitely the most annoying person in the world. The band building is brand new. It was built like 5 years ago, Chuck countered, so it isn't the same. It was eerie, now that I thought about it. I mean, we weren't allowed to stay late. Campus security and teachers made sure of it, sweeping anyone trying to stay behind. Anytime nighttime PTA meetings were held, they were held at City Hall. Now, they said it was because the classrooms here were too small to hold all the parents, but then why wouldn't they just use the gym? I stopped myself. This was just another one of Chuck's stories. It was just a way to pass the time. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearing 5 o'clock. Dad was getting off of work soon. I wondered where he was, or if he even got the message from the school. I wonder if he knew what was happening at Arlena Falls High. It was 6:52 p.m., and we were getting snappish with one another. Fast. Brian was getting on my last nerve. My alone time was precious, and it was being eaten up by his loud mouth. So, Chuck, how do we tell if this witch is with us or not? Does she fly in on a broomstick, or what? There are signs, idiot, she snapped from her desk. She was looking more and more worried as the minutes ticked by. It seemed like after her story, everyone was a little bit more freaked out. Arlette moved her stuff next to me, and while I should have felt some sort of manly pride at being the one that she felt safe around, but, honestly, I was just as uneasy and on edge as everyone else. The outside world was barely visible from our second-story window, and gusts of wind kept occasionally shaking the window from its frame, making us jump. To me, it sounded like someone was tapping on the windows, lining the walls. But we just kept saying out loud as if it made anyone feel better. Stupid wind. Stupid snow. Arlette's stomach grumbled loudly, and she swore under her breath. I wish I had something to offer her, but everyone had already chowed down on whatever snacks that they had in their book bags after school. We didn't even have a stick of gum to split between us. Arlette raised her hand and asked if we could raid the cafeteria or something. Ever the good students. Then paused. Wait, where's Miss Malaeus? Sure enough, our teacher had disappeared. She went to go check on the other students and never came back. That was hours ago. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked around at my classmates, and I felt their hunches raised. The already uneasiness of the room was shifting into something else. Panic. No one panic, Arlette instructed us, but I could see the tremor of her hand. She was just as scared as the rest of us. I'm sure she's just chatting with other teachers and lost track of time. It's been hours, Nick said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He rarely said much. There's no way that she just forgot about us. He paused, scratching at himself nervously. There's just no way. At that point, the power went out. Something banged against the windows, and everyone screamed and started running for the door, tripping over their backpacks strewn across the ground. Just as quickly, the lights flickered back on. The backup generator was picking up speed. Kids were on the floor, rubbing their bruised knees. Some were crying, freaked out. Brian stood up from where he knelt, gripping the desk as if he braced himself for impact. He was looking at me and nodded. Dave and I will go check out the other classrooms and see where Mrs. Malaeus went. Screw me. I knew there was a reason he was my best friend, but also, screw him. I didn't want to leave the classroom, but he was already headed out, so I followed him. That's what I did. I picked up the fire extinguisher. We had a school shooter rally earlier in this semester where some expert told us that a fire extinguisher actually made for a great weapon. I didn't know where I would ever have to think about that again. As we stepped out of the classroom and into the empty hallway, I heard Herman say, "Wasn't she supposed to tell us how her parents were supposed to pick us up?" It was true, and I was suddenly filled with dread. What happened to Miss Malaeus? Was she okay? Brian led the way. Our classroom was older, and a little ways away from the other rooms, so when we got to the first one, we had built up enough adrenaline from the silent anxiety to bust some heads open. Brian knocked, and then opened the door. It was empty. "Isn't this Coach Langdon's room?" he whispered. He taught 6th period geometry before coaching baseball. Why wouldn't he be here? It was amazing the kinds of things that we rationalized. They probably just released the students in waves, I said. Hearing the franticness of my voice, I couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried. And we're one of the last ones since we're so far. But we should go back, man. What if the classes get released and we're left behind? I'm gonna check a few more classrooms. He motioned for me to hand him the fire extinguisher, and I tossed it to him. I'll head back to Miss Malaeus' room. I promise I'll come for you when she comes back. I felt like a coward, but being in the empty hallway, staring at that empty classroom this late after school was terrifying. I had to get back. Brian went on steadily, and I tried not to run back to the classroom. It was 7:12 p.m. They're all empty. Brian set the fire extinguisher next to him with a clunk. He looked pale as a ghost. They're all gone. The teacher's lounge is empty too. Malaeus is gone. But how could she leave us? Arlette stammered. She's our teacher. Come on, I insisted. She didn't just leave us. Shut up, man! With your stupid hard-on for that dyke! Brian practically exploded. She left us. She couldn't have. She probably just went to go get help or something. It was so flimsy that I felt stupid saying it. All eyes were on me. She wouldn't have just left us like this. Not willingly. Not willingly? Chuck repeated. Her eyes got huge, like saucers. Not willingly." She burst into tears, everyone staring at her. "It was just a story." She started crying hard. "It was just a story." "What was just a story?" Herman yelled, terror in his voice. The witch thing?" Chuck just cried harder, rubbing her mascara all over her cheeks. "I didn't think it was real. It couldn't have, but the signs." "What are the signs?" "First, the snow," she sobbed, hiccuping like she was choking. "Then everyone leaves, just disappears." "Then what?" The lights flickered again. Everyone screamed. They dove for one another, trying to grip onto something corporeal. Arlette was no longer grabbing my arm. She was glued to her seat in terror, tears streaming down her face. "The witch will appear as one of us." A deadly silence fell over the room, the kind of silence that only a snowstorm can bring, oppressive and implying something terrible. Brian swallowed audibly. How do we know who the witch is?" This is stupid," I tried. "We're just freaked out. There's no witch. Chuck said that it was just a story that she made up." "No, I read it. The book in the library," she continues to weep. "I found it when Miss Malaeus assigned Lord of the Flies. It was right there in the back." "How do we know?" Brian shouted, commanding the room. I felt silent, watching him pace around the room like an animal. "Come on, Chuck, how do we know?" She kept crying. He walked up to her and grabbed her shoulder, shaking her hard enough for us to hear her teeth clacking together. "Chuck!" "She's quiet. She's not the first person we'd think of." Quiet. Not the first person we think of. So we all thought of the same person. We turned to the corner of the classroom where Delilah stood. She was thin, practically swimming in that giant black hoodie of hers. She was always quiet, hidden away in the background. It turns out, it was her the whole time. She stood there, petrified, staring at us. What? She couldn't even finish her sentence. She raised her hands as if to protect herself. In the center of her palms, dark circles. Stigmata. Like she was nailed to a post by her hands. The generator failed and the lights went out. A gust of wind suddenly defeated all the old windows, shattering in and sending snow and broken glass bits all around the room. It was chaos. Screaming. Brian picked up the fire extinguisher and making his way towards Delilah, who was frozen in fear, babbling incoherently. "Ink!" She kept shrinking. "It's just pen. It's just ink." He moved with such force that I could only think of one thing. I tackled him from behind. "Brian, wait!" He elbowed me right in the nose, blood gushing down my mouth, down my shirt. I gasped for breath, seeing stars and falling back. Delilah ran for the door, lights turning on and off, the generator picking up, speeding and dying, coughing up life and death. Everyone chased after her, picking up yardsticks, pencils or pens, hollering and yelling, sounding like war cries. Arlette helped me up and we ran after them. I was so dizzy, woozy. I heard Delilah screaming and crying for help as she pounded down the stairs, everyone running after her. The doors in the front of the school burst open and she collapsed into a snow pile, running for her life, but everyone was so much faster. Everyone was just so much faster. 9:21 p.m. When the ambulance and fire trucks and police finally arrived, we were half frozen to death. They asked, even later on, why we didn't just go back inside, but they didn't understand. We couldn't. We couldn't go back inside. The blood outside the school mixed with the fresh snow like a dropped Coke Slurpee, browning in the bitterly cold air. The paramedics did their best to scrape up what they could to take back with them. The police stood around, shocked and unsure of what to do. This kind of thing just didn't happen at Arlena Falls. They led Brian away, who was silent and flecked with blood and bits. Chuck kept whispering, "Witches don't bleed. Witches don't bleed." We were all taken to a police station and then released to our parents. Dad didn't say a word about my bandaged nose or my black eye or my choked crying all the way home. I thought about Mom, the emptiness that she left behind. I thought I was gonna die right there in the mudroom of our home, gasping for breath. Dad helped me like I was a kid again, but it didn't make anything right. Accident at Arlena Fall High School leads to fatality by Selena Lamb. When the storm of a century hits Arlena Falls, a greater tragedy occurred when a student, Delilah Chapman, was killed in an accident in the school's courtyard. Sources say that the student in question was well liked by her classmates and was considered a good friend. They say that the straight-A student was quiet and never caused any trouble, and was a valued member of the school's population. The accident occurred when students were left behind and the school lifted their snow day lockdown. In a strange occurrence, students did not check their cell phones to see the lockdown had finished and that they were free to go. School officials say that the teacher of the students left behind, Miss Helena Malayas, is currently on paid administrative leave while the district investigates. Miss Malayas has been a member of the school faculty for 37 years. Flowers and condolences can be sent to the surviving members of the Chapman family, her parents, John and Saleva, at 4237 Rockwell Drive. For more information, subscribe to Arlena Falls Gazette.